Jake Morrison wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stood guard outside the grand meeting hall on Kepler 442b. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble steps, and he could hear the distant hum of alien ships landing at the spaceport. Today was supposed to be just another boring diplomatic event, the kind where he stood still for hours while important people talked about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. He had been a soldier for 6 years now, ever since he graduated high school in his small Ohio town. Jake never imagined he would end up on an alien planet, wearing the blue uniform of Earth's peacekeeping force. Most days, he missed the simple life back home where the biggest worry was whether the Buckeyes would win their next football game. The planet Kepler 442b served as neutral ground between human colonies and the massive Zephyrian Empire. Jake had learned enough about the Zephyrians to know they were old, really old, and they controlled more star systems than humans could count. Their ships were sleek and beautiful, nothing like the bulky metal boxes humans flew between the stars. A loud horn sounded from inside the hall, which meant the ceremony was about to begin. Jake straightened his shoulders and gripped his rifle a little tighter. His job was simple: watch for trouble and keep everyone safe. He had done this dozens of times before without incident. Through the tall windows, Jake could see the Zephyrian delegation taking their seats. They were tall and graceful, with pale blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the light. Their leader sat in the center, wearing flowing robes that looked like they were made from liquid starlight. Jake had heard she was their empress, though he could not pronounce her full name even if his life depended on it. The human delegation looked plain by comparison. Admiral Peterson sat stiffly in his dress uniform, flanked by diplomats in dark suits. Jake felt a surge of pride for his own species. Even if they did not have the fancy technology or the elegant appearance of their alien neighbors. As the speeches began, Jake let his mind wander. He thought about his younger sister Katie back on Earth, probably starting her second year of college by now. He thought about his parents, who still did not quite understand what their son did for a living among the stars. They were proud of him, but Jake knew they worried every day. A movement in the crowd caught his attention. Something was wrong? Jake had learned to trust his instincts during his military training, and right now those instincts were screaming at him. A figure in the balcony was moving too quickly, reaching for something under their robe. Time seemed to slow down as Jake saw the glint of metal. The person in the balcony was pointing some kind of weapon directly at the Zephyrian Empress. Without thinking, Jake burst through the doors of the meeting hall and sprinted toward the stage. "Gun!" he shouted, throwing himself between the Empress and the balcony just as a beam of bright energy shot through the air. The blast hit Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the Empress's chair. Chaos erupted in the hall. Human and Zephyrian security forces swarmed the balcony while diplomats dove for cover. Jake found himself on the floor, his shoulder burning with pain. Looking up into the most beautiful eyes he had ever seen, the Empress was kneeling beside him, her hands glowing with a soft blue light as she pressed them against his wounded shoulder. The pain began to fade almost immediately, replaced by a warm, tingling sensation. "You saved my life," she said in perfect English, her voice like music. "What is your name, brave human?" "Jake Morrison, ma'am." "Sergeant, Earth Peacekeeping Force," he managed to say, still stunned by her presence. "Jake Morrison," she repeated, as if testing how the words sounded. "I am Empress Lirelei, and I am in your debt." Over the next few days, while Jake recovered in the medical bay, he learned more about the woman he had saved. Empress Lirelei was 710 years old, though she looked no older than 30 by human standards. She ruled over 3,000 star systems and commanded fleets that could destroy entire planets. Yet when she visited Jake in the hospital, she seemed genuinely interested in hearing about his simple life on Earth. "Tell me about Ohio," she would say, sitting in the chair beside his bed. "What is it like to grow up in one place, with the same people your whole life?" Jake found himself talking for hours about things he had never thought were interesting before. He told her about high school football games and county fairs, about helping his father fix their old pickup truck and teaching his sister how to drive. Lirelei listened to every word as if he were describing the most fascinating things in the universe. "Your species is remarkable," she said one evening as they watched the sunset through the hospital window. "So young, yet so brave. You have only been traveling between stars for 50 years, but you have already shown more courage and compassion than races that have existed for millennia." Jake felt his cheeks turn red. "We are not that special. We just try to do what is right." "That is exactly what makes you special," Lirelei replied with a smile that made Jake's heart skip a beat. When Jake was finally released from the hospital, he expected to return to his normal duties. Instead, he found himself assigned as a special liaison to the Zephyrian delegation. His superiors explained that the Empress had specifically requested him, and it would be a grave insult to refuse. Jake spent his days showing Lirelei around the human sections of the station, explaining their technology and customs. She was endlessly curious about everything, from how they prepared their food to how they organized their military ranks. In return, she shared stories about her own people and the wonders she had seen during her long life. "I have watched stars be born and die," she told him one day as they walked through the station's observation deck. "I have seen civilizations rise from nothing and achieve greatness beyond imagination. But I have never met anyone quite like you, Jake Morrison." Jake felt something stir in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before. He was falling in love with an empress who had lived for centuries, who commanded vast fleets and ruled over billions of beings. It was impossible, ridiculous, and completely beyond anything he had ever imagined for his life. Then, on the last day of the diplomatic conference, Lirelei did something that shocked the entire galaxy. She asked Jake to marry her. "I know this. Seems sudden," she said as they stood alone in her private chambers. "I know there are vast differences between us. But in all my centuries of life, I have never felt what I feel when I am with you. You make me remember what it means to be truly alive." Jake stared at her, his mouth hanging open. "You want to marry me?" "But I am just a soldier from Ohio." "You are an empress. And you are the man who threw himself in front of a weapon to save my life without even knowing who I was?" Lirelei replied. "That tells me more about your character than any title or position ever could." The wedding ceremony took place 3 days later, broadcast across the galaxy as representatives from dozens of species gathered to witness the impossible union. Jake stood in his dress uniform, still not quite believing what was happening. As Lirelei approached in robes that seemed to be woven from moonbeams and starlight, they exchanged vows in both English and the ancient Zephyrian language, promising to love and protect each other across the vast distances of space and time. When they kissed, Jake felt as if the entire universe had shifted around them. As the celebration continued into the night, Jake held his new wife close and wondered what their future would hold. He had no idea that in just 7 days everything he thought he knew about the galaxy, about his wife, and about humanity's place among the stars would be turned completely upside down. Jake Morrison had been married to the most powerful woman in the galaxy for exactly 7 days, and he was starting to notice strange things happening around him. It began with small details that most people would have missed. During breakfast, on their honeymoon aboard Lirelei's personal ship, Jake watched the news feeds from across the galaxy. A trading fleet that had been heading to the Andorian system suddenly changed course toward the Vega colonies. The news reporter mentioned it briefly, calling it a routine schedule adjustment. "That's odd," Jake said, pointing at the screen. "Why would they change course so suddenly? The Andorian system pays twice as much for those supplies." Lirelei looked up from her meal, her expression unreadable. "Perhaps they received a better offer," she said quietly. Jake shrugged and went back to eating, but something about her tone bothered him. He had learned to read people during his military service, and his wife was definitely hiding something. The next day, more strange reports came in. 3 separate cargo ships had broken their contracts and were now heading to completely different destinations. A mining operation that had been planned for months was suddenly canceled. A diplomatic meeting between 2 species that had been enemies for decades was mysteriously moved up by 6 months. "The galaxy seems busier than usual," Jake commented as he watched the news reports. Lots of people changing their plans. Lirelei was reading something on her personal tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. The galaxy is always changing, my dear. That is the nature of progress. But Jake noticed she was receiving messages constantly now, her tablet chiming. Every few minutes. When he asked about it, she simply said it was routine Imperial business. Yet Jake had been around military communications long enough to recognize when someone was coordinating a massive operation. On the third day, Jake decided to do some investigating on his own. He accessed the public galactic traffic reports from the ship's computer, something any citizen could do. What he found made his blood run cold. Hundreds of ships were moving in patterns that made no sense from a commercial standpoint. Trade routes that had existed for centuries were being abandoned. Military vessels from dozens of different species were quietly repositioning themselves near strategic jump points. Even more disturbing, many of these movements had begun exactly 7 days ago. On the day of his wedding, Jake sat in their private quarters, staring at the data on his tablet. The numbers were undeniable. Someone was orchestrating the movement of ships across the entire galaxy, and they had started doing it the moment he had married Lirelei. "Jake?" Lirelei's voice came from behind him. "You seem troubled." He turned to face his wife, holding up the tablet. "I need you to explain something to me. Why are hundreds of ships suddenly changing course all across the galaxy? Why did this start on our wedding day? And why do I get the feeling that you know exactly what is happening?" Lirelei sat down beside him, her expression serious. "You were always observant. I should have expected this." "Expected what?" Jake demanded. "Expected me to notice that the entire galaxy is being moved around like pieces on a chessboard? Jake, there are things about the galaxy that you do not understand yet. Things that your species has not been ready to learn." "Try me," Jake said, his voice harder than he intended. "I may just be a soldier from Ohio, but I'm not stupid." Lirelei was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing her options. Finally, she spoke. "What do you know about the history of galactic civilization?" "I know that different species developed space travel at different times. I know that some races are thousands of years older than humans. I know that somehow most species manage to get along well enough to trade and cooperate. And does that not strike you as odd?" Lirelei asked. "In your human history, what happened when more advanced civilizations met less advanced ones?" Jake thought about it. Usually the advanced ones conquered or destroyed the less advanced ones, but that is different. This is space. There is room for everyone. There is room, yes. But there are also resources to fight over. Technologies to steal, entire species to enslave or eliminate. Lirelei stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "Tell me, Jake, how many galactic wars have there been in the past 1,000 years?" Jake tried to remember his history lessons. "I do not know." "Maybe a dozen?" "Most of them were small conflicts between neighboring systems." 12 wars in 1,000 years, Lirelei repeated. "And how many species have gone extinct due to war in that same time period?" I do not know." 3. Only 3 species have destroyed themselves through warfare in the past millennium. Lirelei turned back to face him. "You know what the average was before that? 57 species every 1,000 years. Entire civilizations wiping each other out over resources, territory, or simple misunderstandings." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What changed?" "We did," Lirelei said simply. "My people, along with several other ancient races, formed an alliance. We called it the Galactic Concordat. Our mission was simple: guide younger species away from self-destruction and toward peaceful coexistence." "Guide them how?" "By making sure the right trade deals happened at the right time. By ensuring that aggressive species found themselves facing superior forces when they tried to expand. By arranging diplomatic meetings between potential enemies before they could start shooting at each other." Lirelei sat back down beside Jake. "By moving ships and resources around the galaxy like pieces on a chessboard, as you so aptly put it." Jake stared at her, his mind racing. You have been controlling galactic civilization for 1,000 years, not controlling. Guiding, there is a difference. And humanity? Jake asked, dreading the answer. What about my species? Your species presented us with a unique challenge, Lirale admitted. Humans are incredibly aggressive, but also incredibly adaptable. When you developed space travel, we were certain you would start a war within 50 years. Instead, you surprised us by forming peaceful colonies and trying to make friends with everyone you met. So you left us alone? No, Lirale said softly. We guided you too. The mining rights you received in the Tau Ceti system, we arranged for the previous claim holders to withdraw their applications. The trade agreement that gave Earth access to Zephyrian technology? We negotiated that deal centuries before your species even existed. The reason you were stationed on Kepler 442b? We made sure the right people recommended you for the position. Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. My entire life has been a lie? Your life has been your own, Lirale said firmly. Your choices, your actions, your courage that day you saved me, those were all real. We may have arranged the circumstances, but we could never have made you into the man you are. But you manipulated everything. My career, my assignment, even our meeting. We arranged for you to be in the right place at the right time. We could not have predicted that you would risk your life to save mine. We could not have made me fall in love with you. Lirale reached for his hand, but Jake pulled away. How do I know that is true? How do I know my feelings are real if everything else has been planned? Because, Lirale said, her voice breaking slightly, in 700 years of guiding and manipulating galactic events, I have never once made a decision based on my own desires. This marriage, this love I feel for you, it is the first time in my entire life that I have chosen something for myself instead of for the greater good. Jake stood up and walked to the other side of the room, needing space to think. The woman he had married was not just an empress. She was part of a secret organization that had been controlling the development of every species in the galaxy, including his own. The ship's moving around? He said finally. That is because of our wedding? The marriage of a human to the leader of the Concordat is significant. It means humanity is ready to learn the truth about how the galaxy really works. The other members are repositioning resources to ensure the transition goes smoothly. Transition to what? To making humanity a full member of the Concordat. To letting your species help guide the younger races that will come after you. Jake turned back to face his wife, the woman who had just revealed that everything he thought he knew about the galaxy was wrong. And what if I do not want that? What if I think species should be allowed to make their own choices, even if those choices are mistakes? Then, Lirale said quietly, you would not be the first person to question our methods. But you would be the first person in a position to actually change them. Jake looked at his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time. She was not just beautiful and ancient and powerful. She was tired. 700 years of making impossible decisions, of carrying the weight of entire civilizations on her shoulders, had taken a toll that he was only now beginning to understand. Show me, he said finally. Show me how it really works. Show me everything. Lirale smiled for the first time since their conversation had begun. Are you sure? Once you see the full scope of what we do, there will be no going back to your simple life as a soldier? Jake thought about his old life, about the small town in Ohio where his biggest worry had been whether his sister would pass her driving test. That life seemed like a dream now, something that had belonged to a different person entirely. Jake Morrison stood in the middle of the Concordat Council chamber, surrounded by beings that looked like they had stepped out of ancient legends. Some were tall and thin with skin that glowed like moonlight. Others were covered in scales that shifted colors as they moved. A few looked almost human, except for their eyes that held the wisdom of countless centuries. Welcome, Jake Morrison of Earth, said a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. You are the first human to witness this gathering. Jake felt small and out of place in his simple military uniform. These beings had been shaping the galaxy for thousands of years, and he was just a soldier who had gotten lucky. Thank you for allowing me to be here, he managed to say. An ancient being with 4 arms and silver skin leaned forward. Your wife has told us much about you. She believes you can help us understand the human perspective on our work. I am? Not sure I understand any of this yet, Jake admitted. Yesterday I thought I was just married to an empress. Now I find out she is part of some secret group that controls everything. We do not control, corrected another council member, this. One resembling a giant butterfly with crystalline wings. We guide, there is a difference, is there? Jake asked, surprising himself with his boldness. If you decide where ships go, what trade deals happen, and who meets who, how is that not control? The chamber fell silent. Jake wondered if he had just insulted beings who could destroy his entire planet with a thought, but Lirale squeezed his hand encouragingly. That is exactly the kind of question we hoped you would ask, she said. We have been doing this work for so long that sometimes we forget to question our own methods. Over the next several hours, the council members showed Jake the true scope of their operations. Holographic displays filled the chamber, showing trade routes, military movements, and diplomatic communications from across the galaxy. Jake watched as they tracked the movements of thousands of ships, monitored the development of dozens of species, and coordinated responses to potential conflicts before they could begin. This is incredible, Jake said, watching a simulation of how they had prevented a war between 2 neighboring systems by arranging for a valuable mineral deposit to be discovered in neutral territory. But how do you decide what is right? Who gave you the authority to make these choices for everyone else? Nobody gave us authority, replied the 4-armed being. We took it because somebody had to. When we were younger species ourselves, we watched entire civilizations destroy themselves over petty disputes. We decided that if we survived long enough to gain wisdom, we would use it to help others avoid the same mistakes. But what if they want to make their own mistakes? Jake pressed. What if some species would rather fail on their own terms than succeed because you helped them? The butterfly-like being's wings shimmered with agitation. Would you rather we let billions die for the sake of some abstract principle about choice? Jake thought about it carefully. These beings had prevented countless wars and saved entire species from extinction. How could he argue against that? But something deep inside him rebelled against the idea that any group, no matter how wise or well-intentioned, should make decisions for everyone else. I think, Jake said slowly, that maybe there is a middle path. Maybe you could help species without hiding the fact that you are helping them. Impossible, said another council member. If younger species knew we were guiding them, they would either become dependent on us or rebel against us. Neither outcome serves anyone. How do you know that if you have never tried it? Jake asked. Before anyone could answer, alarms began sounding throughout the chamber. Emergency signals flashed on every display, and Jake could see panic in the faces of even these ancient beings. What is happening? Lirale demanded, moving to the central control panel. Massive data breach, reported the silver-skinned being. Someone has accessed our communication networks. They are broadcasting information about the Concordat across the galaxy. Jake watched in horror as news feeds began showing evidence of the Concordat's activities. Secret communications between council members were being played on public channels. Ships' movement orders that had been classified for centuries were suddenly available for anyone to see. The entire galaxy was learning that their governments and their lives had been secretly managed by an ancient alliance. Who is doing this? Jake asked. The hegemony of Kethver, Lirale said through gritted teeth. A species we rejected from membership 300 years ago. They have been trying to expose us ever since. Jake watched the news feeds with growing dread. The reaction across the galaxy was immediate and explosive. Some species were demanding answers from their governments. Others were calling for war against the Concordat members. Trade routes were shutting down as species refused to honor agreements they now knew had been secretly arranged. This is a disaster, said the butterfly being. Centuries of careful work are being destroyed in a matter of hours. Not destroyed, corrected a new voice. Jake turned to see a reptilian being he had not noticed before. Exposed. Perhaps it is time we face the consequences of our secrecy? The consequences will be galactic war, snapped the four-armed being. Without our guidance, younger species will tear each other apart within a decade. Jake found himself at the center of the debate as the ancient beings argued about how to respond. Some wanted to use their military forces to silence the broadcasts. Others suggested revealing even more information to control the narrative. A few proposed abandoning their work entirely and letting the galaxy fend for itself. "What do you think, human?" asked the reptilian being. "Your species is at the center of this crisis. How would humanity react to learning they had been guided? Without their knowledge?" Jake thought about his fellow humans, about their pride and their fierce independence. "They would be angry," he admitted. "They would feel betrayed. But they would also want to understand why it was done. And if they learned it was done to prevent wars and save lives? Some would accept it, others would reject it completely. But most would want to be part of the decision-making process going forward." As they debated, more alarming news came in. The hegemony of Kethver was not just broadcasting information about the Concordat. They were also moving their military forces into position near several key systems. It became clear that they were planning to use the chaos caused by the revelations to launch attacks on Concordat member worlds. "They are not interested in exposing us for the sake of truth," Lirale realized. "They want to destroy us so they can take our place as the dominant power in the galaxy." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. "What kind of species are they?" "The kind that believes might makes right," replied the silver-skinned being. "They were rejected from the Concordat because they wanted to use our influence to conquer other species rather than protect them." "So our choice is between secret manipulation and open conquest?" Jake asked. "It appears so," Lirale said sadly. Jake looked around the chamber at these ancient beings who had dedicated their lives to protecting others. They were not perfect, and their methods were questionable, but their intentions had been good. Now they faced an enemy that had no such noble goals. "There is another option," Jake said suddenly. "What if we tell the truth ourselves before the hegemony can twist it further? What if we explain not just what you have been doing, but why?" "The damage is already done," protested the butterfly being. "Species across the galaxy are already turning against us." "Then we give them a reason to turn back," Jake replied. "We show them what the galaxy would look like under hegemony rule instead of Concordat guidance." "You want us to choose sides in a galactic conflict?" asked the reptilian being. "I want us to choose principles," Jake corrected. "The Concordat has spent centuries preventing wars. The hegemony wants to start them. That is not a difficult choice to make." Lirale looked at her husband with something that might have been pride. "You are suggesting we abandon secrecy and openly oppose the hegemony?" "I am suggesting we trust the species of the galaxy to make the right choice when they have all the information," Jake said. "Give them the truth about both options and let them decide which future they want." The chamber erupted in debate again, but Jake could see that his words had affected some of the council members. The crisis was forcing them to confront questions they had avoided for centuries. Was their secret guidance truly better than allowing species to choose their own path? And if they were going to fight the hegemony anyway, why not do it openly and honestly? As alarms continued to sound and reports of hegemony fleet movements came in, Jake realized that the next few days would determine the future of galactic civilization. The secret that had protected the galaxy for 1,000 years was out, and there was no going back. The only question now was whether the truth would save them or destroy them all. Jake Morrison stood before a massive holographic display that showed the entire galaxy, watching as red indicators spread like a disease across the star map. Each red dot represented a world where the hegemony of Kethver had landed troops or where local governments had declared their independence from any outside influence. "The situation is worse than we thought," Admiral Chun said, pointing to clusters of red dots near the galactic core. 17 systems have already fallen to hegemony forces. They are moving faster than we anticipated." Jake had spent the past 3 days learning about the true scope of the Concordat's work, and what he discovered both amazed and horrified him. In a secure archive deep within Liralay's ship, he found records that went back thousands of years. The files told stories of civilizations that the Concordat had saved, but also of the terrible price that salvation had required. Show him the Altair records, Liralay said quietly. The display changed to show a blue planet orbiting a bright star. The Altarians were a peaceful species that developed space travel about 800 years ago, Admiral Chun explained. They were also incredibly naive. When they encountered the Vorthic Empire, they tried to negotiate a trade agreement. Jake watched historical footage of tall, graceful beings with pale skin and large eyes meeting with heavily armored creatures. That looked like walking tanks. What happened? The Vorthic pretended to be interested in trade for 6 months while they studied Altarian technology and military capabilities. Then they launched a surprise attack and enslaved the entire species. The display showed burning cities and ships fleeing into space. It took the Concordat 50 years of careful maneuvering to free the Altarians and destroy the Vorthic Empire. How many species like the Altarians have you saved? Jake asked. 43 confirmed extinctions prevented, Admiral Chun replied. But the cost of intervention has always been high. We usually had to manipulate other species into fighting our battles for us, which meant innocent people died for causes they did not understand. Jake studied the records for hours, learning about species that had been saved from destruction, wars that had been prevented before they could start, and technological advances that had been shared to help younger civilizations survive. But he also learned about the Concordat's failures. The Kellians refused our guidance, Liralay explained as they looked at images of a dead world covered in radioactive glass. They said they would rather die free than live under our protection. So we respected their choice and withdrew our support. How long did they last? 18 months. They destroyed themselves in a nuclear war over mining rights to their smallest moon. Jake felt sick to his stomach. These ancient beings had watched an entire species commit suicide rather than accept help, all because they believed in the principle of free choice. Why did you not intervene anyway? Because we learned from our mistakes, said the four-armed council member who had joined them in the archive. Earlier in our history, we tried to force species to accept our guidance. The results were always rebellion and chaos. Forced peace is not true peace. The more Jake learned, the more he understood the impossible burden these beings had carried for centuries. Every choice they made resulted in someone living or dying. Every intervention saved some lives while potentially costing others. They had become the guardians of galactic civilization, but the job had required them to play God with the lives of billions. Now you understand why we have kept our work secret, Liralay said as they returned to the command center. Most species cannot handle the knowledge of how fragile their existence really is. Jake looked at his wife and saw the exhaustion in her eyes. 700 years of making life-and-death decisions for entire civilizations had taken a toll that he was only beginning to comprehend. How do you bear it? By remembering that the alternative is worse, she replied. Without guidance, younger species destroy themselves. With too much guidance, they never learn to stand on their own. We try to find the balance between protection and independence. Their conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from the bridge. The hegemony forces were moving faster than expected, and several key Concordat worlds were under direct attack. Even worse, some species that had been protected by the Concordat for centuries were now joining the hegemony forces, convinced that any change would be better than continued manipulation. The Centaurians have declared for the hegemony, reported Admiral Chun. They are sending their entire fleet to support the attack on Zephyr Prime. Jake felt a surge of anger. The Centaurians had been saved from extinction by the Concordat less than 50 years ago, but they were willing to join their enemies rather than continue accepting guidance. Why are they doing this? Because they are young and angry, Liralay explained. They see only the manipulation, not the protection. They think they can handle whatever comes next on their own. Can they? No, the hegemony will use them as cannon. Fodder, and then enslave or destroy them once they are no longer useful. but they will not realize that until it is too late. Jake watched the tactical displays as more red dots appeared across the galaxy. The hegemony was offering every species the same choice: join them in destroying the Concordat, or be destroyed themselves. Many species were choosing to fight rather than submit, but they were not coordinating their efforts. Without Concordat guidance, they were being picked off one by one. "We have to do something," Jake said. "We cannot just sit here and watch the galaxy tear itself apart." "What do you suggest?" asked the four-armed being. "If we intervene openly, we prove the hegemony's point that we are manipulative controllers. If we do nothing, they will eventually destroy us and everything we have built." Jake thought about the problem for a long time, considering everything he had learned about the Concordat's history and methods. Finally, an idea began to form in his mind. "What if we give them a choice?" he said. "Not the choice between Concordat guidance and hegemony conquest, but a real choice about how they want the galaxy to work." "Explain," Lireley said. "You have been guiding species in secret because you thought they could not handle the truth. The hegemony is offering them conquest disguised as freedom. But what if we offered them something different? What if we offered them partnership?" Jake moved to the central display and began calling up star charts. "Instead of hiding your work, make it public. Show every species exactly what you have been doing and why. Then offer them the chance to join the Concordat as equal partners, not subjects to be protected." "Well, that's never been tried," Admiral Chun said doubtfully. "Younger species lack the wisdom to make such decisions responsibly." "Maybe," Jake agreed. "But they have something you have lost after centuries of making decisions for others. They have hope. They have the belief that things can be better than they are. And if they choose poorly? If they reject our guidance and destroy themselves? Then that is their choice to make," Jake said firmly. "You cannot protect people from their own decisions forever. Eventually they have to grow up and take responsibility for their own lives." Lireley looked at her husband with a mixture of admiration and fear. "You are asking us to risk everything we have built on the hope that younger species will make wise choices. I am asking you to have faith in the same qualities that made you want to protect them in the first place," Jake replied. "Their courage, their determination, their ability to grow and learn. You have spent so much time focusing on their weaknesses that you have forgotten their strengths." The command center fell silent as the ancient beings considered Jake's proposal. Outside, the galaxy was descending into chaos as the hegemony forces continued their advance. But inside this room, a simple human soldier was asking some of the oldest and wisest beings in the galaxy to take the biggest leap of faith in their long history. "If we do this," the four-armed being said slowly, "there will be no going back. Once we reveal everything, we cannot return to the old ways of secret guidance." "Good," Jake said. Secret guidance was never going to work forever anyway. The hegemony proved that by exposing you. At least this way, you get to control how the truth comes out. Lireley moved to the communications console. "Very well, we will try your approach. But I want you to help us coordinate the response. If we are going to ask species to trust us with their future, they should hear from the human who convinced us to trust them with ours." Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. In a few hours, he would be addressing the entire galaxy, asking them to choose between partnership and conquest. The fate of every living being in the universe would depend on whether he could convince them to work together instead of tearing each other apart. "What do I say to them?" he asked. "Tell them the truth," Lireley replied. "All of it. The good and the bad, the successes and the failures. Then ask them what kind of future they want to build together." Jake nodded and began preparing for the most important speech of his life. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the greatest act of leadership is knowing when to step back and let others lead themselves. Jake Morrison stood before the largest audience in galactic history, looking out at billions of beings watching from thousands of worlds across the galaxy. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady as he began to speak. "My name is Jake Morrison. 2 weeks ago, I was a simple soldier from a small town on Earth. Today, I stand before you as the husband of Empress Lirale and a witness to truths that will change how we all think about our galaxy. The massive communication array aboard Lirale's ship was broadcasting his words to every inhabited world, every space station, and every ship in the galaxy. Jake could see the faces of humans, Zephyrians, Centaurians, and dozens of other species, all watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to anger to fear. You have learned that the Concordat has been guiding galactic civilization for over 1,000 years. You have learned that many of the events you thought were natural or coincidental were actually carefully planned. I know you feel betrayed, and I understand your anger. When I first learned the truth, I felt the same way. Jake paused, thinking about everything he had discovered in the past week. But I also learned something else. I learned about the 17 species that destroyed themselves before the Concordat was formed. I learned about the 43 civilizations that were saved from extinction through Concordat intervention. I learned about the wars that never happened because wise beings worked in secret to prevent them. On the display screens around him, Jake could see reactions from across the galaxy. Some beings were nodding in understanding, while others looked skeptical or hostile. The hegemony forces were still advancing on multiple fronts, using the chaos to capture more worlds. The hegemony of Kethver wants you to believe that any guidance is evil, that you should reject all outside help and stand alone against the universe, but they are not offering you freedom. They are offering you the chance to become their subjects instead of Concordat partners. Jake activated a holographic display showing hegemony-controlled worlds. Look at what has happened on the planets they have conquered in the past week. They have stripped away local governments, seized all military forces, and begun extracting resources without any regard for the people who live there. This is not liberation. This is conquest. The images were devastating. Entire cities had been occupied by hegemony troops. Local leaders had been imprisoned or executed. Factories that had once produced goods for local populations were now churning out weapons for the hegemony war machine. The Concordat made mistakes, Jake continued. They should have trusted you with the truth much sooner. They should have asked for your permission before guiding your development. But their goal was always to protect and preserve life, not to control or exploit it. Lirale stepped forward to stand beside her husband. Jake Morrison has convinced us to try a new approach. Instead of secret guidance, we offer open partnership. Instead of making decisions for you, we invite you to help make decisions with. Yes, the response from across the galaxy was immediate and intense. Some species sent messages of support, grateful that the Concordat was finally being honest with them. Others rejected the offer completely, declaring their intention to remain independent regardless of the consequences. Many more asked for time to consider the proposal, but the hegemony was not giving anyone time to think. Their forces launched a massive coordinated attack on 12 Concordat worlds simultaneously, betting that the confusion and anger caused by the revelations would prevent an effective defense. They are attacking Zephyr Prime, Admiral Chun reported. Urgently, all our major shipyards and command centers are under assault. Jake watched the tactical displays with growing alarm. The hegemony had planned their offensive well, striking at the heart of Concordat power while their enemies were divided and confused. Without immediate action, the ancient alliance would be destroyed within days. We have to fight back, Jake said. But we have to do it the right way. What do you mean? Lirale asked. I mean, we fight as partners, not as secret manipulators. We ask for help openly, and we coordinate our defense with any species willing to join us. Jake turned back to the communication array. Citizens of the galaxy, the hegemony is not waiting for you to decide. They are attacking Concordat worlds right now, and they will attack your worlds next if we do not stop them together. I'm asking you to join us, not as subjects or puppets, but as equal partners in defending our shared future. The response was swift and surprising. The first species to answer the call was humanity itself. Admiral Peterson, Jake's former commanding officer appeared on screen from Earth's orbital defense platform. "The Earth Defense Force stands ready to assist," Peterson announced. "We may not like being manipulated, but we like conquest even less." Within hours, other species began responding. The Altarians, who had been saved from slavery centuries ago, sent their entire fleet to help defend Zephyr Prime. The crystalline beings of Vega offered their advanced shield technology. Even some species that had initially sided with the hegemony began to reconsider when they saw the brutal treatment of conquered worlds, but the real surprise came from an unexpected source. The Centaurians, who had declared for the hegemony just days earlier, suddenly switched sides in the middle of a battle. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Centaurian fleet," came a transmission during the height of the fighting. "We have seen what the hegemony really offers, and we reject it. We are joining the defense of Zephyr Prime." Jake watched in amazement as the tide of battle began to turn. The hegemony had counted on fighting a confused and divided galaxy, but instead they faced a coordinated defense by species working together by choice rather than manipulation. The battle for Zephyr Prime lasted 3 days. Jake found himself in the strange position of helping to coordinate a galactic military operation while still learning the basics of interstellar warfare. But his human perspective proved valuable in ways he had never expected. "The hegemony is using Earth tactics," he observed during one planning session. "They are trying to overwhelm us with superior numbers and firepower. But they are not adapting to the terrain or using the flexibility that smaller forces can provide." "What do you suggest?" asked Admiral Chun. "We use guerrilla tactics. Hit and run attacks using the asteroids and gas clouds for cover. Force them to spread out their forces so we can defeat them piecemeal." The strategy worked. The combined fleet used the diverse capabilities of different species to maximum advantage. Zephyrian ships provided long-range firepower, human vessels offered tactical flexibility, Altarian craft delivered precision strikes, and vegan defensive screens protected the entire force. When the hegemony finally retreated from Zephyr Prime, they left behind a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed. Species that had never worked together before had fought side by side. Governments that had been suspicious of each other had shared intelligence and resources. The secret manipulation of the old Concordat had been replaced by open cooperation. Among equals, Jake stood on the bridge of Liralay's ship, watching the repair efforts on the planet below. The battle had been won, but he knew the real work was just beginning. "What happens now?" he asked his wife. "Now we build something new." Liralay replied, "The old Concordat is dead. In its place, we will create an alliance based on transparency and mutual respect." Over the following months, representatives from across the galaxy gathered to draft the charter for what they called the new Cardat. Instead of secret guidance by ancient species, it would be an open alliance where all members had equal voices. In major decisions, Jake found himself appointed as the first human ambassador to the alliance, a role he had never imagined when he was standing guard outside a diplomatic meeting just a few months earlier. His job was to help bridge the gap between species with vastly different cultures and histories. "You realize this will not be easy," Liralay warned him as they prepared for the first official session of the new Concordat Council. "Some species will always prefer independence to cooperation. Others will expect us to solve all their problems. For them, nothing worthwhile is ever easy," Jake replied. "But at least now we are being honest about what we are trying to do." The opening ceremony of the new Concordat was broadcast across the galaxy, just as Jake's speech had been weeks earlier. But this time, the message was one of hope rather than crisis. Jake stood before the assembled delegates, representatives of hundreds of species who had chosen to work together rather than fight alone. "We gather here not as rulers and subjects, but as partners in building a better future. We will make mistakes, and we will disagree, but we will face those challenges together." As he spoke, Jake thought about his journey from a small town in Ohio to the center of galactic politics. He had saved an empress and married a woman who had lived for centuries. He had learned secrets that had been hidden for millennia and helped transform an ancient alliance into something new and better. But most importantly, He had helped prove that sometimes the greatest act of wisdom is admitting that you do not have all the answers, and the greatest act of strength is asking for help from those you once thought you needed to protect. The galaxy would never be the same. And Jake Morrison, the humble soldier from Earth, had played a part in changing it forever.